Well, when I came to New York, as most starving artists are, I was starving and I didn't have a lot of cash. And so right away I started looking for the lowest rent area in the city. And the Lower East Side at that time was available. Right away I looked at a storefront and moved in as a studio and living space combination. In quite a short time, that studio living space also became a cafe where local friends could hang out, and gradually it developed quite a thriving poetry and jazz music scene. Became called Life Cafe, and the reason for the name was because of my lack of funds for renovation. I I had brought a lot of collectible things like old Life magazines from the 30s, 40s, 50s. And that became my wallpaper. I covered up the holes in the plaster with the Life magazines and covered the whole front of the building with a collage of Marilyn Monroe and John Kennedy and so forth and so on, and called the place Life. I was a painter, and painters from the Midwest tend to be a little bit skeptical about New York. And so the first place I headed looking for a place to live was the West Coast. I spent a long time in Seattle and San Francisco in the Southwest. Eventually then making my way back to the East Coast, and a friend asked me to spend some time in New York City with him. And right away I fell in love with the city, saw that it was the place I'd been looking for all along. New York changes daily, but generally speaking, what tends to happen in New York City is that the new arrivals settle in a part of the city that's run down a little bit, lower rents, because that's what they can afford. They congregate there, and a kind of in the case of the Lower East Side, in the case of Greenwich Village and Soho, an art scene develops, or starts to develop. It's at that point that the city's eyes open, and the collectors and the critics and the galleries start to kind of assemble around this low-income area and look for opportunities. Just before that point, the Lower East Side was like the Wild West. It was everybody was responsible for themselves. There were many clubs that opened, gathering places that weren't legally licensed, but compared to the heroin and the cocaine traffic that was next door, they were seen as a civilizing influence and allowed to continue to exist for some time. That created a foundation and a community, but then I believe a little bit too quickly, the collectors and the galleries moved in and tried to exploit the vitality of that scene, as they are wont to do. And they did, and the Lower East Side art scene started to mushroom, and was successful for a short period of time. I think it could have done more if it was left alone longer. But what happens is that when collectors come in and start buying art out of the studios and storing it in Brooklyn and waiting for the artist to die, it stops the development of the community, and of course artists start competing with each other instead of just living in proximity of each other, and it cuts short the dialogue and the development of a philosophy and a rationale for the movement, the artistic movement. And so without that firm foundation, why we're doing this artwork, it tends to fragment it and eventually to disintegrate.